Kia ora, and welcome to Aotearoa's Opportunity, a podcast where we talk about fair pay agreements and how they can help us tackle some of Aotearoa's most urgent issues.
In this podcast, everyday workers will be sharing their stories about the issues that they deal with in their industries and how we can discuss solutions that FPAs will have to offer.
So, no mai, haere mai, and welcome to Aotearoa's Opportunity.
So one of the things we keep being told, and the famous phrase is, there is no alternative. There is an alternative. Yeah. Everything that we do in economics is a choice. Yeah. Everything that we do in the economy and society is a choice, and we can choose to do things better. The reason we don't choose to do things better many times is because there are interests. There are those who benefit from the current situation. A big part of my role at the CTU is to help highlight where alternative choices would lead to better outcomes for our members, for society in general, but also being able to work out, well, if we did do things differently, if we did genuinely take, choices and options where we went, if we did this differently, what would that mean? Can we demonstrate the benefits not only for us, but for our kids, for our society, and for everybody else?
Kia ora, and welcome to the Aotearoa's Opportunity podcast. This week, Melissa Ansell-Bridges will be talking to Craig Renney, who's the economist at the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. Craig will be talking through the economics of fair pay agreements, tackling some of the myths and the misconceptions that are out there about what fair pay agreements mean, and talking about how actually fair pay agreements help build a fairer economy, better for workers and better for everyone. If you like the episode, make sure you like and subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues to help build the movement and get the word out. Thanks and enjoy.
Craig Renney is an economist who has previously worked for the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, the Reserve Bank, Treasury, and as Grant Robertson's the Minister of Finance, Senior Economic Advisor. He helped the Labour Party deliver their first wellbeing budget in 2017. This made international headlines by including social and environmental indicators to judge the effects of policies rather than relying solely on economic metrics. Craig was also responsible for discovering the $4.7 billion fiscal hole in Paul Goldsmith's 2020 budget, playing a significant role in sinking the National Party's previous election bid. Within his more recent work as the CTU Economist and Director of Policy, he calculated that property investors and top income earners would get 10 times as much tax relief from National's tax plans as middle and low income earners. Thanks so much for joining us today, Craig. It's a pretty interesting and exciting CV, and clearly you've had significant experience and have a really deep understanding of the New Zealand economy and the role that you're playing now as the CTU economist and policy director. I'm really keen to I have an understanding, but for you to share with the listeners some of your background, which has informed the work that you've undertaken over your working life, and also your motivations for working with the Council of Trade Unions.
Thank you. A terrifying secret about me is not only that I love economics, is that
I don't think that's a secret, Craig.
Is that I saw my first budget when I was 9.
Yeah, that is terrifying.
And by the time I was 12, I knew what I wanted to do for a living. Which was to write a budget. And so the study of economics is something that came really naturally to me. It was something that the dynamic interplay between supply and demand and the kinds of forces which seemed to be in equilibrium at different points in time made a lot of sense intuitively to me. But I could see this system which said that it worked, in which was going to deliver prosperity, in which we had great market outcomes for everyone. Yeah. And I grew up in a coal mining village in the northeast of England called Cramlington. And I saw the devastation that this system reaped upon my community. Yeah. I saw the terrible outcomes for families in that system. And A and B don't equal each other. And so a big part of my life throughout university, throughout my study, throughout my work, has been trying to work out how can we deliver a better way? How can we make sure that we're delivering policies and programs and government spending that genuinely deliver for those communities that are really doing it tough? Yeah. Because we can pretend that the economy works, or we can make it work. Yeah. And a big part of why I'm here is to help make the economy work for working people. because if we can make it work for working people, we can make it work for everyone.
There's a sense often I feel when we talk about the economy as well, that it just sort of is what it is. It sort of functions with a life of its own. It's like reading the weather, as opposed to actually it's something which is very much made by people, is the way that it is by design. And that also means that we are able to change it.
Absolutely. So one of the things we keep being told, and the famous phrase is, there is no alternative. There is an alternative. Everything that we do in economics is a choice. Yeah. Everything that we do in the economy and society is a choice, and we can choose to do things better. The reason we don't choose to do things better many times is because there are interests. There are those who benefit from the current situation, and a big part of my role at the CTU is to help highlight where alternative choices would lead to better outcomes for our members, for society in general, but also being able to work out, well, if we did do things differently, if we did genuinely take choices and options where we went, do you know what, if we did this differently, what would that mean? Can we demonstrate the benefits not only for us, but for our kids, for our society, and for everybody else? And that's one of the great attractors of this job, working at the CTU, is we have the opportunity to help talk to New Zealanders about actually what are the alternative choices that are in front of us and why we should choose them.
Yeah, and one of those choices which has been made recently by the Labour government, by the union movement over a long period of time, is to try and do something about our workplace relations structures and try and make an improvement there. And the outcome of that has been fair pay agreements as well. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective on fair pay agreements with your economist hat on. And I guess the first question is, any thoughts that you have on what impact, what the interplay will be between fair pay agreements and the economy more generally? I know that's quite a big question.
No, it's a bit, well, I mean, one of the first things that we need to do is to dispel several myths.
Okay.
And I don't want to get into fact checking, but we've heard so much negative stories about a fair pay agreement, how they're going to do this, that, or other. In reality, fair pay agreements across the world are common.
Yeah.
They're quite straightforward. They used to take place in New Zealand until relatively recently in our economic history. They're just a simple system of collective bargaining across a sector or an industry. And certainly from an economic perspective, they're no more progressive or less progressive than any other policy that exists.
Yeah.
It's how they're implemented and how they're done, which is really going to make the difference.
Okay.
And what we're seeing in New Zealand under the current legislation is a proposal that we believe, and I certainly believe, is not only going to help deliver a better economy, a more resilient economy, but one that's more inclusive. One where workers will get more of the share of the output that they deliver, and one in which workers and workforces will have a more secure work and better work in future.
That resilience, which you've mentioned, I think is really important as well. And we've had successive crises over the last few years. And I'm wondering if you sort of have any reflections in particular on that resilience and the role that fair pay agreements would pay for making communities more resilient.
Well, so one of the things that we do very badly in New Zealand is education and training. Yeah. One of the things we do very badly is making sure that workers have the skills to get not only the job that they're doing now right, but also the skills in their future, so that they're getting the next job, so that they're able to make sure that they've got security of employment. Fair pay agreements require training and development as part of their overall package. Fair pay agreements also rely upon the idea that we're going to stop the race to the bottom in industries. One of the things that's bedeviled the New Zealand economy is in many of our sectors, we've raced to the bottom using low pay and chronic low productivity as a means of delivering output. Fair pay agreements help to stop that, and they help to move us towards a pathway where we're delivering on innovation, we're delivering on research and development, God forbid on product quality and choice, things actually consumers care about. And that is one of the reasons why fair pay agreements are so important. They change us from our current growth track, where we sell more and more, the volume side, and instead we move to value, where we're selling our expertise, we're selling the value add that we do. And fair pay agreements are a big step in helping to move towards that new growth trajectory.
And that just sounds inherently so much more positive for the New Zealand economy. A current issue for a lot of working families is the cost of living. We've seen inflation rising steadily over the last little while, and it's impacting people a lot. And I think that's probably an area of concern for a lot of working families. Interested to hear your thoughts about the impact that fair pay agreements might have on inflation.
Sure. So, I mean, it's really interesting because one of the things that we've seen over the past few months is a real concentration on the role of wages and inflation, and this expectation that wages will drive inflation.
Yeah.
We don't have any evidence of that right now. But one of the things we do have really good evidence for is that over the past 10, 15 years, it has been the lowest income earners who have suffered the most from inflation. Their inflation has been running much higher than general inflation, and they've fallen further and further behind.
Yeah.
Fair pay agreements create a floor in an industry or a workplace, and it will protect those lowest paid workers. It will make sure they don't fall further and further behind. And from an inflation perspective, at a micro level, at an individual household level, those vulnerable workers will be protected from inflation in a way that they're not now.
Yeah.
At a macro level, one of the things it does is it gives stability, it gives security, it gives certainty for employers about what pay will be, about what hours and terms and other conditions will be, because that's the flaw in that industry. And so as a consequence, they're able to better plan, they're able to better invest, we're able to provide that resilience in the economy, which takes some of the inflation out of the economy. Finally, one of the things that a fair pay agreement does is it makes sure that when you're in an industry or a sector where there's a huge amount of competition which is driven by wages, bus drivers are a great example in this space, we're shifting the point of competition away from the drivers' wages to something else. And again, from an inflationary perspective, that's going to help us create a much more level playing field across those industries. So there's nothing to fear from an inflationary perspective for a fair pay agreement.
Couple of things in there in terms of what you just said, that idea of moving the way that businesses compete away from wages seems to me, well, then you're going to be competing on all of the other things, which will lead to product innovation and an improvement in the quality of services and goods and so on, which is something that, consumers of goods and services will benefit from, as well as the people who are doing that work as well, presumably.
Sure. So one of the things that we've seen since 1991 is that there was a very important date in New Zealand history. Every year since 1991, labour productivity has gone up.
Yeah.
And it's sort of gone up and up and up and up.
Yep.
But wage growth has lagged further and further and further behind. And every year that gap has got wider and wider and wider. And as a consequence, the productivity gains have increasingly gone to firms.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the productivity consequences, one of the things we want to talk about is how do we start to close that gap so that workers take home more of the gains that they've given up to employers, so that their share of the economy doesn't continue to decline over time.
And that gap, that increasing gap, is one of the causes of the huge inequality that we see in New Zealand now, right? For those who might be listening and are not familiar with the date that is 1991, that of course was when the Employment Contracts Act was passed, which dramatically changed employment relations in New Zealand and really removed the role of unions for a lot of people, and has very clearly led to that widening of the gap. And I suppose this in a way is this period since 91 to when the Fair Pay Agreements legislation was passed is a bit of an anomaly in New Zealand's labour relations history as well. And we've seen a huge amount of devastation that has come from people not having access to this kind of industry bargaining, right?
And that highly atomised workplace, where there were lots of individuals who were at the beck and call of their employer. From an employer flexibility perspective, is fantastic.
Yeah.
But think about the consequences on society. Think about the consequences on communities.
Yeah.
New Zealanders already work some of the longest hours in the OECD.
Yeah.
We work on average 3 weeks at work longer than an OECD worker.
Wow.
It's not because...
I can think of so many things I'd rather be doing with that time, right?
But there are so many things that, so in terms of those 3 weeks at work, we already work longer, but we get less per hour worked than the average OECD worker.
It's a pretty raw deal.
Yeah. And so our productivity problem isn't as a consequence of workers not working hard enough.
No.
It's as a because if that was the case, New Zealand's productivity problems would have been solved
it would be
years
sorted,
ago.
Right?
It's as a consequence of our inability to bring together the factors to deliver smart growth rather than harder growth. And certainly from a fair pay agreement perspective, it provides that opportunity to create the environment in which we can work smarter, where we can work more collaboratively together, and that will help deliver the sustainable, the inclusive economy that we want to see in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. You've already touched on this a little bit, but interested to know your thoughts on why businesses should be excited about fair pay agreements. What's the benefit to businesses?
Sure. So, in part, it's planning.
Yeah.
A fair pay agreement provides certainty for firms as to what the floor is in a sector, that each of their competitors faces the same challenges that they do, and they can concentrate in those areas that are outside of the fair pay agreement.
Yeah.
So they now know the boundaries in which they can compete, not just on labour, but now on research and development, on innovation, on product quality, on a range of other items where New Zealand historically, and New Zealand markets historically haven't been good.
Yeah.
But two, one of the big challenges for any firm is another firm comes along who's just prepared to do the things that they're not prepared to do.
Yeah.
To push wages harder, to remove some of the terms and conditions that they otherwise face.
Yeah.
And what this does, and we've seen this in plenty of markets overseas, the low-cost airline market is a classic example of where through driving down terms and conditions, you see some firms competing on the basis of ultra-low cost, but the cost of that falls on the workforce.
Yeah.
And it falls on product quality, rather than being on competing on the same basis. Fair pay agreements provide the basis for competing on a level playing field. And firms should welcome that. It means that they know that nobody can come along and compete on that basis and drive them out of business. So good employers who already have good relationships with their employees, they should be the ones that really welcome a fair pay agreement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's exciting for those businesses that are trying to do the right thing, and there are a lot of them who, there'll be some of them as well who are in a situation of trying to do the right thing and actually feeling like the market that they're operating in is what's stopping them from actually doing that as well.
Competitive markets always look for advantage.
Yeah.
They always look for ways in which one firm can compete against another.
Yeah.
The challenge we've had in New Zealand is that over the past 30, 40 years, that competition has been in one area.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is to broaden those areas so that we get better outcomes, not only for the workforces, we get better outcomes for the economy.
Yeah.
We're not so reliant on a few narrow industries. We're not so reliant upon a few narrow areas inside those industries. We're not so reliant upon a few narrow providers of work in those spaces.
Yeah.
Again, we're able to diversify, and fair pay agreements provide that basis.
Yeah. Especially when competing in that one area, there's very evident negative outcomes for a lot of people, and competing in those other areas, there's very evident benefits to that competition.
So in economics, because we have to afford our expensive suits, we use a fancy term called externalities, which is we externalize the costs of those things out of the firm to somebody else.
Yeah. Society, the environment,
the workforce.
Yeah.
And we just externalize those costs to somebody else. And what a fair pay agreement does is it stops that externality from occurring, where you simply pass down the costs of competition onto the workforce, and instead you drive them elsewhere.
Yeah. So you're actually saying, no, this is the cost of doing business, includes paying your workforce fairly and actually bringing them sort of in-house a bit more.
Which I would hope, the vast majority of New Zealanders listening to this or, listen to this podcast would say, do I want places, when I go to a retail outlet, do I want the staff to be happy? Do I want them to have a future? Do I want when I catch a bus, do I want the bus driver to not be tired because he or she has had to work a split shift or something else? Do I want my security guard to not be wondering about where the next job is going to be because he or she has had to work 17 different jobs over the past 30 days because they keep being moved around from such and so forth? These are the simple things that a fair pay agreement will help to address.
Yeah, and that will benefit everybody in society as well.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like, if anything, there'll be positive impacts on productivity. Sometimes you hear concerns from people around being paid the same as other people, or that fair pay agreements will somehow, disincentivize hard work. Interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Again, as we said earlier, it's not as if New Zealanders don't already work hard.
Very hard. And long.
And long hours. Again, some of the longest hours in the OECD.
Yeah.
The challenge is to work smarter.
Yes.
The challenge... Good productivity comes from working smarter, not working harder.
Yeah.
One is sustainable.
Yeah.
The other one's not sustainable. You will find somebody who will work harder than you and eat your lunch. And so the ability to work smarter is a key driver of a fair pay agreement. So, will it mean that you get paid the same as everybody else? No.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a base, it's a floor.
Yeah. Like the minimum wage is currently, right?
It's just simply saying in this industry or in this occupation, this is the base rate for this kind of work. If you're a great worker, of course you can get people. Your normal employment relations conditions don't change as a consequence of a fair pay agreement. All they do is they mean that you can't be forced to accept a wage lower or terms and conditions lower than that in order to get the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So an employer can't use the power imbalance that exists in too many workplaces in order to create the conditions in which they can benefit against the worker who's may well be desperate for a job, may well be desperate for the income. We live in a country in which the cost of living is already high, in which for many, putting food on the table and keeping a roof over their head is a daily challenge.
Yeah.
If someone says, I'm going to take your work away, we need to make sure that we're providing the means in which we can look after people. Fair pay agreements just simply stop that race to the bottom and where the employer can make gains at your expense.
So it's really just saying that, the starting point for your negotiations with your employer is going to be a little bit higher than it is currently, and whether you're doing that bargaining as an individual or as a part of a collective in a union for a collective agreement, you're just sort of starting at a sort of firmer starting position.
Well, certainly one of the things that it does is it doesn't stop you from earning as much as somebody else, or it doesn't stop you from earning less potentially. So what it does is it just creates that floor in the terms and conditions, and that's not only important for you; it's important for all of the firms in the industry. Because if you move from company A to company B, you still know what the floor is,
because it will still apply to you even if you move around.
Why is that important? Pay equity.
Yeah.
Gender pay gaps.
Yeah.
One of the key fundamental tenets of any marketplace is that the more information we put in the marketplace, the better the marketplace
greater
works.
Transparency will,
We're putting more information in the marketplace. Workers will have more information, will have more knowledge. That leads to a better labour market.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something which, people who are covered by a collective agreement benefit from, right? But that's relatively few people. So this just means that kind of transparency is going to be available to a lot more working people as a result. And
again, if you have a collective agreement, it doesn't mean that you revert to the fair pay agreement.
No.
The collective agreement exists above or around the collective, the fair pay agreement. What we're doing is we're making sure that everyone understands that you can't push wages or terms and conditions below a certain point to gain competitive advantage. That has benefits for workforces, has benefits for productivity, as is also discussed, but it also has benefits for transparency in the marketplace, and it has benefits for those communities who tend to suffer from that disadvantage more than others. Māori, Pacifica, women, disabled workers, they will all have better outcomes as a consequence of a fair pay agreement.
That's really exciting. And I'm thinking through, some of the industries, which are the first industries where those fair pay agreements are going to be negotiated, like early childhood education, thinking about, young people working in hospitality, security and cleaning, all those kinds of industries where there are significant populations of workers who, are often at that disadvantage and the huge benefit that it's going to have to a lot of those communities.
In a perfect world, we wouldn't need these things.
Yeah.
What the world in which we live,
yeah.
we have a significant power imbalance that exists between employers and employees in many of the sectors that you've just discussed.
Yeah.
The reason why sectoral bargaining works is it removes that power imbalance.
Yeah.
It takes the pay and the terms and conditions conversation away from being a highly individualized conversation to being a systemized conversation.
Yeah.
And it's in that systemized conversation that you can then have conversations about, well, hang on a second, why is there a group in our workforce who's paid less than somebody else?
Yeah.
Why is there why are there no protections afforded to this group in this area over here? And you can systemize those conversations, have them on a scheduled basis, and make sure that not only are you delivering better outcomes for workers, the economy benefits as a consequence.
Yeah, that's it's really exciting. I'm interested. I mean, there's a lot of very immediate benefit, which everyone that's going to be covered by a fair pay agreement will experience, and the economy more broadly, as we've discussed. I'm thinking ahead to the future, though, and I know that the future of work has obviously been an area that you've been very engaged with over the last couple of years, and as a part of that, it's really thinking around the challenges in the future, the ways in which our economy might change, that work might change, and sometimes that's because it's happening to us, and sometimes it's a choice that we're making, but all things like technological change, climate change feed into that as well. And I'm interested to know your thoughts on what role fair pay agreements can play as a part of that transformation, which is often inevitable.
I mean, you're quite right. There's a range of international organisations, from the IMF to the OECD, the ILO, who have identified that we have these changing trends in work.
Yeah.
And those changing trends in work have winners and losers.
Yeah.
And the benefits accrue not equally, but highly disproportionately to some groups.
We can probably guess along what lines, right?
And we've been here before.
Yeah.
We can look back at the devastation that was reaped in various communities in the 1980s in New Zealand, where we had economic change that occurred like that. And the scarring effects of that can still be impacted, can still be found in communities right around New Zealand. One of the things fair pay agreements do is they give the ability to plan.
Yeah.
They give the ability to create collaborative workplaces rather than workplaces which are characterized by conflict.
Yes.
And if we can get employers and employees working together to say, okay, we know that this work is going to fundamentally change, or this work is going to fundamentally automate, or this work is going to disappear. Yeah. How can we take that workforce and move them to new work? How can we take that work, this type of work, and make it work into the future? Yeah. How can we train workforces to access the jobs in the future, which are still going to be needed, but which may look very different to the ones that we have right
now.
New
technologies and
Absolutely. And finally, how can we do that in a way where we share the rewards of that change? Yeah. Where we make sure that everyone benefits from that change. So not only we welcome that, we accept that change. We don't create the kinds of responses we've seen in the US, for example, to economic change. But we also do that in a way where we minimize the costs of that. And those costs are enduring, severe, and can take generations.
The costs on individuals and on communities.
Well, on individuals, on communities, just on companies. If you imagine, if you're a large firm and you've got a very capital intensive, so you've got a lot of money invested in a factory,
Lots of equipment and
and you can see the economic writing on the wall.
Yeah.
But there's a chance that you could be something different in the future.
Yeah.
You've got two choices in front of you. You can close the factory today,
yeah,
sell it to somebody else and try and make it somebody else's problem. Or you can work with the workplace to try and have that viable future.
Yeah.
And those economies that do well, those economies that we aspire to look like, are those economies that choose option B.
Yeah.
And those are the economies that are genuinely resilient to change, where the workforces are more educated, where there is more inclusion and there's less of the kinds of inequality and insecurity that we see in New Zealand. And to me, it's a really simple and straightforward choice.
Yeah.
We can use fair pay agreements as a means of bringing workers and employers together.
Yep.
To help have that conversation about change, to help make it part of the normal conversation about terms and conditions, and about making sure that workers have work security, they have income security, and employers know that they're going to have a workforce that wants to work with them to help deliver that.
And that really sounds like a win-win situation, right?
And again, this isn't some utopian dream. We can point to plenty of countries around the world, be it Germany, be it the Nordic countries, be it elsewhere, where we can go, we've seen change occur, but we haven't seen a loss of prosperity.
There's no sort of devastation that comes as a result of that change occurring.
But we have seen plenty of examples in economic history, in New Zealand, in the UK, in the US, of where we do choose option A.
Yeah.
Where we choose to continue the conflict, where we choose to de-invest, and we reap the reward as a consequence of that.
It's that sort of not taking a proactive approach, right, to manage that change, be it a choice or an inevitability, which seems to disadvantage. And, you know, and as you've said, fair pay agreements present an opportunity to do that deliberative planning jointly.
Which brings us back to the very first question you asked.
Yeah.
Everything in economics is a choice.
Yes.
And we can choose a better outcome. And fair pay agreements are just part of that package of choosing better outcomes. There's nothing inevitable about our economy. No. There's nothing inevitable about the consequences that we want to have for society, or the level of unemployment, or the child poverty, or something else. We can choose better decisions. And that's that choice that we're doing with fair pay agreements.
Fantastic. Well, that's a beautiful full circle. I think we can probably leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Craig. Really enjoyed talking to you about this, and really excited now about the positive impact that fair pay agreements are going to have on our economy.
As am I. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can't wait another day, can't waste another day. Keep pacing back and forth when I ought to go and walk. You know they wanna give it to you just to take it all away. Got to make it all yourself if you want to say it's yours. Cold weather turned muggy, now there's sweat dripping off my skin underneath the 17 layers that I'm dressed in. Feeling less than, time to turn the sign around and focus on what I have found. How to escape life through sound. It's a whole different plane of being. People who don't know how to speak can say what they are feeling. The energy suckers are still feeding. They can drain my whole body of blood, but I'm still breathing. Still reeling from the shock of bereavement. I'm feeling too resilient. For my own good, these neurons ain't communicating. It's no good, I need a little something. Don't know why I'm running, but I'm running. Running away from these commitments. They're trying to pin me down, but I can't be found. I'm way too fucked like the system, and fuck it all anyway. Who cares? One day I got the energy, the next it ain't there. I see ignorance prevailing far and wide. Yeah, the night is long and it's dark outside. There's no time, still no sense of urgency. A metal glove above our heads for crushing insurgency. But this planet's in emergency. It's burning ain't the type of problem we can solve verbally. I can feel the pain and it's hurting me. I know you're hurting too, cause they're hurting me and they're hurting you. Breathe the microparticles and microplastics. There's got to be an answer, but I don't have it. Just be nice to each other and shit. Do what you think is right. Don't just see what someone else is doing and copy them. You can take it on board, but make sure that what you're doing comes from the heart. That's the key, you know. You don't have to be like me, you know. You don't have to be like anyone except for yourself. You don't even need to be that either. And what the fuck is being anyway?